may I be an instrument to your ears and a light in the midst of the darkness of today. Be with us this day, O God. Amen. Our scripture for the few moments I have will come from Psalms 27, the first through the fifth verse. Psalms 27, 1 through 5. And it reads, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though a host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident. One thing have I desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all of my days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion, and in the secret of his tabernacle he shall hide me, and shall set me upon a rock." For the few moments I do have, I would like to tag this message as "When Despair Meets Hope." When despair meets hope. I would like to challenge you that despair can be found all around us. Even as we sit inside this room, inside this hotel, inside this building, inside these lights, despair can be found all around us. Despair can be found today when mental health continues not to be funded and people wait 3 months just to receive a medical evaluation and find themselves unable to pay for the medicine that is needed to restore their life. When it appears that some lives that have been kissed by the sun have no value from others, today, despair can be found. When it's easier to buy a gun than it is to fill out a financial aid application, despair can be found. When Americans who were born into this country find their future threatened just because of their ethnicity of their parent, despair can be found. Today, despair can be found when our willingness to serve God is more about denominational alignment than the work of showing God's love. Despair can be found, my brothers and my sisters. It can be found when we jump through all the denominational standards and still find ourselves working 2 jobs, 70 hours a week, and not caring for ourselves nor our families, and still not even good enough by other standards. Today, despair can be found when seniors continue to wait for a hot meal and are pinched between food and survival. Today, despair can be found when mothers and fathers are concerned if their children will even return home. Today, despair can be found when preachers become confused that money and influence is more important than their goal of sharing the gospel. Despair can be found when there's an opioid epidemic that has been stated that is a nationwide problem. But when crack was placed in specific areas, there was no national outcry, and clearly despair can be found. When I think of the songwriter that said that I've had some good days and I've had some hills to climb, I've had some weary days, and some sleepless nights. But when I look around and I begin to think those things over, all of those good days outweigh my bad days. I wonder if anyone can say today that they know that if it wasn't for God who carried them through those dark days of rejection and loneliness and pain, but through it all you realize that you found yourself on empty. See, it's very difficult to have a spirit of worship if you find yourself connected to despair. A great philosopher once says that you don't develop courage by being happy in your relationships every day, but you develop it by surviving difficult times and challenging adversities. See, this quote challenges me to have courage and to make a stand regardless of the despair that may be to my left and to my right. We are reminded that with God, we still can be survivors, but by surviving through difficult times, we see God to be our refuge. Can you feel the despair? The pain of feeling that you have failed? Can you see the despair when you're sitting in your room in the late night hour, but the temperature is too cold outside for you to begin to walk? Your mind is uneasy. You're unable to sleep. And the only question is, when will this verb called sleep find you? Can you see it when the prayer time ends and when drops of sweat and a tear mixture that it tastes literally so salty and bitter upon your lips meets you with silence from God? As you sit there in that late night moment, you realize that the person that you would call or the family members that you would reach out to are asleep and unavailable to be reached. But as you sit there, you realize that there are some people who no longer speak to you because you accepted an opportunity to serve the beloved community in a space that doesn't have watch night service, nor a Hammond organ can be found. Can you see it stepping outside of yourself just so you can serve God and still feel alone? While trying to walk in your authentic voice to declare that Jesus is Lord. Can you see it when God equips you to serve all of his sheep and not just the ones that look like you, cook like you, talk like you, and walk like you? See, I see it because that's my story. I accepted a cross-cultural appointment in Montgomery, Alabama. But in the midst of my worship of excitement to serve God in a new way, I found myself in much despair. We're reminded a lot in this particular text. There are several things for the reader and those who hear these words. We know the writer was pursued by enemies and was shut out from the house of the Lord. So we can begin to imagine what it would be like to be objected to that type of slander. But the beauty of the text is that we are affirmed to know that the Lord is our light and our salvation. Who shall we fear? The Lord is our light, and I believe that the words of the particular psalm are very important because with light, things are made visible. See, whether God did it for our good, it is clearly still light. The writer tells us that the Lord is my light, and that tells us that there are times that darkness will clearly be present. Why would the light be needed? We are affirmed to know that the Lord is our light, and the Lord never creates people, person, events, or for no particular purpose. The light must be to give us strength in our own weakness. The only thing guaranteed in this life is change. The only thing guaranteed in this life is change. I love how this psalm ends with the 5th verse that I shared earlier. For 2 other translations shares, it says, "For in a time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle, he shall hide me, and he shall set me upon a rock." But it's something about how that NIV places it that I think will let us ride home today. "For in the day of trouble, he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of a sacred tent, and he will set me high upon a rock." The commonalities in our text, regardless of the translation, that we know that there will be times when we experience God even in rough moments. But we are to be affirmed to know today that in the midst of our despair, in the midst of our hopeless moments, that we still can have a breath to worship. Because there's safety, even without the glamour, the friends, and those who will celebrate you. We must remember that we must stand with the hope. So we must have the hope to know that you can stand in pulpits that you've never seen before. You must stand today with the hope to walk toward another day. Hope to stand by as denominational politics attempt to take you out. Hope to stand to know that you can be empowered to still be creative for the glory of God. See, when the text alludes that you are hidden, it doesn't mean you can't be found. See, when I was a little boy, I would play hide and seek very often. And while I would play hide and seek, it was so awesome when one of my friends would find me, but it didn't mean I was it. Just because I was found didn't mean that I was going to be tagged next. It just meant that my friend saw me. I believe sometimes when hope and despair connect together, it's just because our despair finds us at a touch of hope. We must take the gospel as our strength and stand when despair seems not to be accompanied by hope. Some time ago, I was driving in my Toyota black Camry. I love my black Toyota Camry. It's a 2013 black Toyota Camry. I love my car so much because I've actually paid for my car. I know every month when I get that payment that I'm paying for it myself. I feel very proud of my Toyota black Camry. You know, it has the little tent that makes sure that I'm still safe even when I'm pulled over, but it makes sure the sun doesn't shine in so much. But one day while I was driving on those back roads in South Georgia, I was heading to one of my good old denominational meetings and realized that I was about to be late, and of course the young preacher could not be late to the meeting. My GPS offered an alternative route, not to be confused with alternative facts. The suggestion from my GPS shared with me that I could cut 20 minutes off of my trip as long as I took some back roads. I began to get very excited about taking and getting these 20 minutes off of my trip. As I began to drive down those roads in back South Georgia, the roads began to be very windy and curvy up and down the hills, and began to see more cows instead of street lights, and couldn't find a sidewalk nowhere. But as I continued to drive, I passed a sign that said there would be no gas station for 30 miles. And in the midst of that, I realized that I would continue to drive. And while I continued to drive, eventually my gas needle met the letter E. When my gas needle met the letter E, it was a sign that I was clearly on empty. My car continued to flash a light that told me that I was out of gas, and it said the car had 0 miles to empty. As I continued to drive, I began to call on the thoughts from my mother that told me, you turn off the radio, you turn off the air, because you can go a little bit further. And while I tried to do those things, it was just so hot that day in South Georgia that I just said, I'd rather be cool for 5 more minutes than to be hot for 20. And so as I began to drive, and car was on E and it said 0 miles. I realized that I was still driving and had no gas, or it at least appeared to be that way. And so as I began to drive, I was able to go another 20 miles and reach that gas station. See, when hope and despair match together, you sometimes can be in situations just like this. And so all I want you to know is that I went with my black Toyota Camry to the dealership to report the issue. And when I reported to the dealer and told him that my black Toyota Camry was not operating effectively, he shared with me that, Mr. Williams, you don't know how your car actually works. That there's a reserve tank actually on your car, and when it appears to be empty, you will realize that you will have some more work that you still can do. So when hope meets despair, sometimes God puts us in a position where literally we can worship when despair finds us, when people seem to be against us. Hope can meet despair, and we can still worship God. Be blessed.